Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the final New Year, New Language session of day three. And I'm excited to welcome back to the New Year, New Language Summit Tamara Maria, who is the founder of Spanish con Salsa. And she's also a certified language coach and a self proclaimed Latin dance addict from the US. She combines her passions for languages, music, travel, and culture in her work Spanish con Salsa. So watch this session with Tamara, which is called The Three Biggest Mistakes That Keep Intermediate Spanish Learners from Fluency. And be sure to also check out the offers from Tamara Maria down below the presentation, which has a free offer for everyone. And there's also an offer for the All Access Pass holders, which I just mentioned. So enjoy this session, and I hope you enjoyed day three. And as always, leave your comments below the presentations or send me an email. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
In this presentation, we're going to talk about some things that you should absolutely stop doing if you're already at the intermediate level. And the reason for this is because when you're an intermediate learner, you really should be pushing yourself a little bit more. And, as they say, what got you to where you are now is not going to get you to your next level and where you want to go. So, we're going to talk specifically about some things that you might still be doing that worked when you were a beginner, but not so much when you reach the intermediate level. So, going through our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the problems with defining what it means to be an intermediate learner. We're going to tackle that. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Common European Framework for Languages and why at Spanish con Salsa, we don't 100% stick to that. I'll speak a little bit about that because I think it's important when we're talking about conversational fluency. And then we're going to go into three specific things that if you're doing them and you're an intermediate learner, you need to stop. And although I'll be talking specifically about Spanish, you can apply these lessons to any language that you are learning. But before we get started, just a little bit about me. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but basically, my name is Tamara Marie. I'm a certified language coach. I'm also a lover of languages. I've learned Spanish, not just sort of traditional Latin American Spanish, but specifically focused on the different regional types of Spanish that are spoken throughout the Caribbean. And because I am a language learner who was diagnosed late in life with ADHD, I found that learning through music was especially helpful for me for a number of reasons, which I don't have time to get into, but that was really how I learned the language. So it is how the concept for Spanish con salsa developed. Actually, funny story, it was a conversation I had with Ali Richards from Story Learning, which used to be I Will Teach a Language, at a language festival in Montreal where sort of the name Spanish con salsa was born. So, but in any case, it really came out of my own experience learning languages through travel, conversation, music, dancing, and really making it an immersive experience. I'm also a mom, and yeah, I'm going to let you read the slide. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just so you know a little bit about me and why I'm really passionate about this topic and really want to help you get through that, plateau of being a beginner to get to be an intermediate language learner, but not just a language learner, but hopefully a speaker of the language that you're studying. It can be a little difficult to define what we mean when we say intermediate level. The truth of the matter is that there really is a large range of Spanish learners with varying levels of skills and abilities in different areas of proficiency. That it's kind of difficult to nail down exactly what is an intermediate Spanish learner. Now, at Spanish con Salsa, we don't necessarily follow the Common European Framework for language levels to the letter. And there's some reasons for that, which I'll explain. But basically, this idea of being at the intermediate level can be a little bit tricky to define. So I want to admit that at the outset, but I want to talk about how you can really gauge what your Spanish level is and what are some of the issues with just relying on the CEFR or the Common European Framework for language levels, because again, it can be really difficult to gauge exactly where you are on that scale. But for all intents and purposes, if you are a super beginner, like if you're just starting out, you don't know a lot of vocabulary, it's really difficult for you to put words together. I'm sorry, words, put sentences together in Spanish. If you don't have a lot of exposure to the language, then of course you're probably a beginner, right? So I'm talking about people who have already learned some of the basics of the language, whether you started out with something like Duolingo or another app, or you've done a little bit of coursework before, even if it was in school. It could have been years ago. But basically, you're not completely brand new to the Spanish language. You have somewhat of a foundation. You might not feel like you can have a really strong conversation yet, but you know some things in Spanish. You can pick out some words as you're listening to them. Now, the problem I have with defining this by just using sort of the A1, A2 sort of levels for language learning is one, it's really tricky to be able to get an accurate assessment of your level when you're using one of these online tests. And the reason for that is most of those tests can really only gauge your vocabulary and your grammar knowledge. But if you actually look at the framework that defines these language levels, there's a lot more functional ability and things that you're able to do with the language, as well as your reading comprehension and your listening comprehension and your ability to carry on a conversation. It's really difficult to test those things with some sort of app or quiz that you just find online because again, they tend to be very focused on vocabulary, but mostly grammar. So you can tend to pass a test, is what I'm saying, with one of these and say, oh, I'm level B1, but you can't have a conversation in Spanish. Which, if you actually look closely at the guidelines, you should be able to do certain things like introduce yourself in the language, tell some facts about yourself. But it's really difficult, again, to gauge that just by taking a test. So for that reason, I wouldn't just rely on going to the Cervantes website, for example, and doing their like free assessment and then patting yourself on the back because you got a result that you're level B2. This might just mean that you got lucky on some of the answers, even though you weren't 100% sure, or that you're just good at passing grammar tests. But it really doesn't give us any indication of your true level. I will give you access to our assessment that we use at Spanish con Salsa to really gauge your level of conversational fluency. And that's a little bit different, again, than just sort of saying I'm level A1 or B2 or whatever. We're really looking at your ability to communicate in the language as well as have some foundational, foundational skills. So make sure you stick around to the end, and I'll share that with you if you want to get a little bit more of a detailed assessment, but also just more of a realistic assessment of where you really are with your conversational fluency in Spanish. All right. So now that's out the way, I do want to focus on some of the things that you should actually stop doing altogether if you're at the intermediate level, because like I said, there's a huge range. That's kind of the other problem with this category. You could be at the lower intermediate level where you're literally just out of that beginner phase, but you're ready for the next thing. You could be somewhere in the middle where you're squarely in that intermediate zone, or you can be a little bit more advanced where you can have lots of conversations in Spanish, but there's still some things that trip you up. All right. So there's a huge range of skills and abilities, like I said before, within the context of intermediate, which makes it so hard to get out of, right? Because to get to that advanced level, it just takes a lot more time than it took you to get from beginner to intermediate. So this is where a lot of language learners actually get discouraged because they're like, I know a lot. I feel like there's things I know, but there's still so much I don't know. And then you start to recognize and get frustrated with your lack of ability to communicate the way you would like to, or to sound more like a native speaker, because you've already put in so much effort. It may have been years that you feel like you're just still stuck at this intermediate phase and you don't feel like you're advanced, you don't feel fluent. So it really can be a murky territory to be in. So what I want to give you some advice on is how you can push past that. How do you get from being sort of in this intermediate sort of not necessarily a plateau. I don't want to call it a plateau, but it is a longer phase of your language learning journey. So if we want to, be able to get beyond this, what are the things that we need to do? So, I have 3 tips for you to help you get past your challenges, or just quite frankly, things you should stop doing if you're already at the intermediate level of your Spanish journey, because these are things that will keep you stuck where you are. The first thing is you need to stop exclusively listening to and watching content that's made for Spanish language learners. So there's a saying, anytime you're trying to get to the next level of anything, whether it's, your relationships, your fitness, your well-being, all applies. What got you where you are now won't get you to the next level. So you may have had a lot of success starting out with a particular type of course. So, for example, I really like the Pimsleur language course for Latin American Spanish if you're a beginner. Or if you just have never spoken before and you're afraid to talk to people, because it gives you an opportunity to listen and repeat a lot so you get some practice speaking. That's great if you're just starting out, because it gets you, over that hump of not being able to speak at all. But let's say you've already sort of done that. You've been able to have conversations successfully, even if they're not perfect, right? Obviously, you're going to still be making lots of mistakes at this stage, and you want to be reducing those. But if you're still just focusing on, okay, my next step is I'll do the intermediate Pimsleur course, then I'll do the advanced course, right? That's fine. And they do have additional levels, which I think are also great. But absent actually using the language in the real world, those things become less and less effective at your level. So the first thing to do is to stop only relying on courses and content that's made for language learners, because that will not get you out of this intermediate phase that you're in. So, what should you do instead, right? Instead of just going to all the YouTube videos that are made by your favorite language YouTuber where they're explaining things about the language or telling you about different things, or even just listening to podcasts that don't have any content that is 100% in Spanish. So, like for our intermediate learners, I will point out for our podcast, we actually have identified all of the episodes that are only in Spanish. So, such as like interviews and some episodes where we're telling stories in Spanish, and even episodes where we break down songs where I do the breakdown only in Spanish. Even beyond that, a really good thing to do at the intermediate level are immersion activities. So, what do I mean by that? Immersion simply means that you're doing things that you would normally do in your target language, in your native language, and do those things in your target language, or in this case, Spanish. But this is also something you can apply to your next language and your next language and your next language. So once you get to this intermediate phase and you've kind of learned some of the basics, even if, again, you don't have them 100% down yet, this is the time to start doing immersion, where you do the things that you do in your native language in Spanish. But find an activity that you like, right? If you don't like to dance, which I couldn't imagine, but if that's not your thing, maybe you like listening to the news, or maybe you like cooking. There's like many different cooking channels maybe you can find on YouTube where they're teaching you how to cook different types of food, whether you're a vegetarian or keto, which I won't get into that. But whatever it is, or you're interested in Colombian cuisine or Dominican cuisine, there are so many YouTubers or websites where you can find recipes. You can actually watch the videos in Spanish. And the key to this is that these are not things that are made for Spanish learners. They're actually made for a Spanish speaking audience. So that's what you want to look for, not things that say, for intermediate level learners. Although, again, those things are great as a supplement to your learning, but you really want to start shifting more towards content that's made for a Spanish-speaking audience. So whether that is going to the website for your favorite news channel that you follow, going to the Spanish version of it, whether that is like I mentioned, finding a topic that you already are interested in, something that you already consume content for in English, and just doing that in Spanish. I know one of the workshops that we did a few months ago, someone said they were really interested in, I think it was mixed martial arts, MMA, or some type of fighting style. I can't remember. Maybe it was UFC, which I think might be the same thing. So clearly I know nothing about about those sports, but they were super interested in it. So I told them to go to this app. It's called iVoox. So Ivoox. And it's a podcast app basically, but it has a lot of content that's made for Spanish speaking audiences. And while we're literally on the workshop, he starts searching in the app and he found a podcast in Spanish about mixed martial arts. So again, that's the type of thing you want to do, whether you're into sports, whether you're into, maybe you're a health nut, you like listening to things about wellness and well-being, maybe you're an entrepreneur. There's so much content out there that's made for a Spanish-speaking audience that you can begin to consume. And again, that'll help you sort of get beyond this sort of intermediate level. So don't just rely on things that are made for Spanish learners. That's number one. Number two is you need to stop ignoring your mistakes. Now I know that there's definitely there's these two sort of extremes, right? Some people are just like, I'll just go out there and speak, and I don't care if I sound wrong and I'm not pronouncing words correctly. And then there's the other extreme of people who are so afraid to make mistakes that they want to read every grammar book and have everything right to the letter before they even begin to consider thinking about uttering a sentence in Spanish, especially to a native speaker, because they're super intimidated. So we have really these two extremes, and what you want to be is somewhere in the middle. So you don't want to be afraid to make mistakes, but what do you do when you make them? And I think that's the part that's missing. A lot of people give this advice. Go ahead and make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Okay, well, that's great, but what do you do after you make the mistakes? Because just making them is not going to help you if you're not learning from those mistakes. So my suggestion, instead of just sort of going out there and sort of making mistakes all over the place without any strategy, is to actually get feedback. And a good way to do that is with a language exchange partner or with an experienced coach or a tutor. We have a great team at Spanish con Salsa. Again, if you're interested, definitely check out our website, SpanishConSalsa.com. You can go right to sign up for a Spanish lesson. If you need to just get a session with someone to just give you some feedback. And the best way to do that is just to have a conversation, ask them to note your mistakes as you're talking, and then let them let you talk. Let them let you. That was a lot. But just talk, have a conversation, and ask them to note down your mistakes. And at the end, they can share them with you. And that's not it. So after that, right? So you get someone to observe you, give you the feedback. Then you want to actually take that feedback and you want to start practicing those things. So if it's a word that you got incorrect or something with grammar that you're messing up or pronunciation, those are the things that you'll begin to practice as you're doing your individual study to prepare for your next conversation. So you want to really focus on whatever issues that you have with the language and start knocking them out one by one. And the way to do that is with an experienced tutor or a teacher, preferably, and have them note down that feedback for you and then focus on studying those things that you know you need to improve. And the third thing that you should stop doing at the intermediate level, if you really don't want to stay stuck there, is stop relying too much on English. Now, when you're a beginner, it's perfectly fine to use the English language when you need to because you're not always going to understand what's going on. I personally am not of the mindset that you need to start at the beginning with 100% immersion because it's just so much quicker to be able to explain things in English that you'll get the concept and then you can move on versus sort of sitting there and struggling and someone trying to explain to you how to say cat in Spanish without using any English. Oh, es un animal, no es un perro, pero es parecido. All of that, right? Like that takes so much time. And there's some value in that, but I just don't think it's very efficient when you're a beginner and you have this whole language at your disposal that you can use in most instances, especially with Spanish because there's so many resources available. So I'm not of this mindset that you have to do 100% Spanish at the very beginning. But when you get to the intermediate level, you really do need to stop relying on English. This is where you need to stretch yourself and try to explain what you need to say in Spanish, even if you don't have the exact word that you want to use in English. So don't use that as a cop-out. So, try to really force yourself to only use Spanish. And a great way to do that is to stop talking to bilingual language partners. So maybe you have a significant other, a spouse, boyfriend or girlfriend, or just a friend that speaks both Spanish and English, and you might practice Spanish with them, but because both of you also speak English, how many times do you actually revert to like saying something in English or just using Spanglish because it's easier for you, right? So that'll get you good at speaking Spanglish, which is great, right? Like that is also pretty valid. However, if you want to focus on improving your Spanish, you need to really cut out that habit and start talking to people that don't speak English. So this is looking for language exchange partners, maybe that maybe they speak Spanish and another language like German, which if you don't speak German, that's great because you can't rely on English. You guys, the only language you have in common would be Spanish. So look for language partners that maybe Spanish is their second language, so they're also learners, but they don't necessarily have English as a language that they use. Or even native Spanish speakers that don't have a high level of proficiency in English, so they're not going to want to speak to you in English, right? A lot of Spanish speakers are learning English, especially if you're on a language exchange app and you're looking for someone to chat with. But if they're at a beginner level, they're going to be much more comfortable talking to you in Spanish. So just try to cut out talking to people that are bilingual when it comes to your targeted study time. That doesn't mean that you don't talk to your bilingual friends. It just means that when you're focused on proficiency and improving your Spanish, that you really focus on only talking to people that speak Spanish and don't mix in English. And you can also do that in your sessions. If you have a tutor or a coach, you can just let them know, listen, I am really trying to work on this. Please do not explain anything to me in English. Can you just explain it to me in Spanish? And if we get really, really stuck, we'll look up the definition and explain it to me. That'll be a little bit more painful. It will take a little bit longer, but it will help you sort of stretch your brain to get rid of the habit of relying to or falling back on English. All right, so I hope that you found these 3 tips helpful. So again, the 3 things to stop doing immediately if you want to get out of the intermediate level is stop exclusively listening to content or watching content that's made for Spanish language learners. Stop ignoring your mistakes, whether it's pronunciation or grammar or word choice. Stop doing that. Start fixing those things. And stop relying too much on the English language. Try as best as you can to spend your time 100% in Spanish. So I hope you found those tips helpful. And before I go, I did want to offer you a little something since you sat through this presentation. Hopefully, again, that you found it useful. And it really is important to focus on these things to get out of the intermediate phase and really to make progress towards true conversational fluency. So as a gift to you for sitting through this presentation, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to map out your goals a little bit more specifically. And I know, New Year's comes around and everyone's talking about goal setting and, I want to learn, 17 languages this year and I want to get to level C1 in all of them or whatever it is that, maybe you're not as ambitious and you just want to get fluent in Spanish, right? But either way, those goals or those intentions is really what a more accurate description is. They're not really complete until we actually sit down and map out what we're going to do and make a plan. Then a goal is really just a wish. And if you're at the intermediate level, just deciding that you're going to go through a course or have random conversations with a tutor or really try to master grammar isn't actually adequate to get you to fluency. And I know a lot of you may like to read and write in Spanish, but when I refer to fluency, I'm talking more about having conversations, which is a completely different skill than being what I would call more of a silent language learner. So to that end, I am gifting you, just because you attended this event, opportunity to have a one-on-one with our team absolutely free. Now, this is usually a $60 session, but in this session, what we will do is walk you through our process to set a true 90-day goal that will get you to conversational fluency. So not just, again, like, I'm going to take course X and I'm going to get to level B2 and I'm going to learn grammar point Y, but I really am going to get to a point where I can have fluid conversations in Spanish with native speakers and reduce the amount of mistakes that I make and increase the amount that I'm able to understand what's being said to me and learn how to think on my feet. These are all skills that you need in conversation. So if you're interested and you want to take advantage of our one-on-one coaching session, you have until January 31st if you want to get that scheduled. And you can schedule it, I think we have up to 90 days in advance. You can schedule a session, or maybe 60 days. You have to look on our calendar, but just go to the link here on the slide, and it'll give you that discount code. You have to put this code in order to get it for free, because otherwise it will set up the charge for the $60 for the session. But yeah, I hope you take advantage of that. It is a real good opportunity for you to get some feedback and some guidance. And this session is held by our certified language coaches on our team at Spanish con Salsa. And we really do focus on helping you become comfortable. So I don't want you to feel like, this is going to be intimidating. And hopefully, if you're at the intermediate level, the idea of having a conversation in Spanish doesn't completely freak you out. But if it still does, our team is really, really good at meeting you where you are. So don't feel any type of anxiety over this, or any type of, I'm not sure what to expect. It's really going to be tailored to you and your needs. You can ask any question, and we will really help you nail down a realistic goal, so you can focus on those activities that will actually get you to fluency and not just make you a really good learner. We want to focus on going from Spanish learner to Spanish speaker. So that is our goal at Spanish con Salsa. Of course, we incorporate lots of different modalities into the way that we help people acquire language. However, it really is tailored to your interest. I personally love music, specifically salsa, bachata, Latin music, mainly from the Caribbean. But if that's not your jam, then we will help you figure out what those things are that will move the needle for you. So it really is a personalized session where we take into account your goals, your preferences, where you are, and we'll give you some honest feedback about your level and what those things are that you need to work on to improve. So I hope you'll take advantage of this one-on-one language coaching session. Again, you have to schedule this by January 31st, and please do not share this. This is only for you who have attended this event, and I want to just thank Chris and his whole team for inviting me to present. And I hope that, again, you found this helpful, and that whatever you do this year with Spanish and with other languages, that you are working towards getting one step closer to being bilingual, or if it's your second or third or fourth language, that you are making strides to communicating and connecting with people. Because to me, that is what learning language is all about. And also, if you want to check out the podcast, I put that here as well on the slide. Learn Spanish con Salsa. You can search for it on any app where you get your podcast. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Learn Spanish con Salsa. All right. That is it for me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Adios.